The blizzard didn't merely strike it, unleashed its fury like a primordial beast awakening from slumber. Ice crystals hammered against the reinforced walls of Marcus's dwelling, each impact reverberating through the metal framework with violent persistence. The tempest shrieked through gaps in the structure, a banshee's wail that made the ventilation ducts rattle and coated the energy collectors in a crystalline shell. Within these protective barriers, the thermal generator hummed its steady rhythm, the sole constant sound amid nature's chaos. Firelight danced against the carved stone interior, casting amber shadows that writhed and twisted. Marcus hunched beside the heating unit, his weathered frame bent forward. Calloused fingers wrapped around a ceramic mug containing liquid that had cooled hours ago. The drink remained untouched, a ritual more than refreshment, something to occupy his hands while the profound quiet performed its ancient work here on the forgotten moon of Kithara Prime. This silence carried weight, not peace. He had journeyed to the rim of charted space seeking exactly this, the heavy, pressing quiet that only existed in the void between stars. He had chosen it, pleaded for it, demanded it. Following the conflict, after witnessing unspeakable horrors and committing acts that haunted his dreams, sound served only to remind him of commands barked in desperation, screams of the dying, and the earth-shaking rumble of collapsing fortifications. Silence alone refused to echo with accusation, yet tonight, the quiet seemed to crush down upon him with unusual force. His gaze wandered toward the equipment rack beside the entrance. Suspended there hung a weather-beaten military satchel, standard infantry issue from 2 decades past. The metal clasps had corroded, the unit markings scorched beyond recognition. Months, perhaps years had passed since he'd last examined its contents, but something in the storm's fury compelled him forward. Kneeling slowly, he unfastened the deteriorated buckle and withdrew a faded photograph. 4 faces stared back, 3 soldiers and 1 field medic, all wearing combat fatigues, all smiling. Marcus appeared on the left side, unmarked by scars, younger, gripping his weapon as though it weighed nothing. The others had perished. 2 he had interred personally. The 3rd had died in his arms, blood seeping into the frozen earth. Closing his eyes, he held the image like a sacred relic. That moment represented the last time he had believed in anything: brotherhood, purpose, duty, the mission that would define them all. A sound pierced the tempest's roar. Not thunder, not the wind's lament. A deliberate knock. Marcus's head snapped up, his body tensing. He froze completely. Another knock echoed, barely audible above the storm. Then came a dull impact, as if something or someone had collapsed against the door. His instincts activated like ancient machinery. He seized his thermal jacket, grabbed the plasma pistol from its wall mount, and approached the entrance with caution honed by bitter experience. In this desolate place, there were no neighbors, no patrols, no lost explorers. Anyone knocking in this wilderness meant danger. He disengaged the locks, braced himself against the howling wind, and cracked the door open. His breath caught in his throat. 3 figures stood against the blizzard's assault. The wind lashed at them mercilessly, yet they held their ground. A woman tall, gaunt, trembling with cold stood foremost. Her skin bore a pale azure hue, stretched taut across angular features. Silver hair whipped behind her like torn fabric, matted with frost. Amber eyes blinked against the driving snow, too luminous, too deep. Clinging to her legs were 2 youngsters, small and fragile, their skin the same blue tone as their mother's, but with short, disheveled silver hair and eyes that seemed too large for their thin faces. The elder child, perhaps 7 years old, attempted to shield the smaller one with his own tiny frame, though he clearly suffered from the bitter cold. Marcus remained motionless. He had witnessed much during the war, but this sight defied easy categorization. Then the woman spoke. Her voice emerged strained and low, as if forming words caused physical pain. I will share your bed, human. My children require a father. The statement struck him like a physical blow, not because he misunderstood her meaning, but because of how she delivered it, without seduction, without negotiation, only exhaustion and utter desperation. Marcus blinked, too stunned to respond immediately. The boy raised his head, lips tinged blue, teeth chattering violently. We haven't eaten in 3 cycles, he whispered in broken common tongue. But Mother said someone with kindness would help us. Marcus's gaze fell to the girl. Barefoot, without shoes, her toes turning purple, her breathing shallow and labored. She looked up at him, not weeping, not frightened, merely curious. Do you have broth, sir? She asked softly. Mother says warmth comes from kind souls. Marcus's grip tightened on the door frame. He was not a kind man, not anymore. But even he recognized certain boundaries. He lowered his weapon, stepped aside, and spoke hoarsely. Enter, now. The woman hesitated for just a moment, as if unable to believe his words. Then she gently guided the children forward. They stumbled across the threshold, collapsing near the thermal generator, arms still wrapped protectively around each other. The woman entered last, ducking her head slightly, and sealed the door behind her. She avoided his gaze, speaking no further words. Marcus secured the entrance, once again locking out the storm's fury. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. He watched them without speaking. The boy curled around his sister like a miniature guardian. The girl pressed her face against the heating vent, her eyes fluttering closed. Their mother sank to her knees beside them, still shivering. Her hands were raw and crimson, the nails cracked and bleeding. Her clothing consisted of patched scraps, little more than rags. He noticed the bruises on her wrists, half-healed, faint but unmistakable. She had grown accustomed to suffering, perhaps accustomed to bartering herself for mercy. Marcus moved to the storage unit and retrieved a container of leftover stew. He heated it without words, filled 3 bowls, and distributed them one by one. The woman accepted hers last, cradling the warmth as if it were a sacred offering, inhaling the steam before daring to taste it. Her eyes glistened, but she blinked. Away the moisture. The boy ate methodically, each motion careful and precise, as if food were a resource requiring strict rationing. The girl Nira, the boy called her, ate too quickly, choked and gasped for air. Her mother panicked instantly, trying to assist, but Marcus was already kneeling with a cup of water. She's fine, he said quietly, just too eager. The woman accepted the water, murmured, "Thank you," without meeting his eyes. Nira, recovering, looked up at him again. "You have a mark on your face," she said, pointing to the long scar crossing his cheek. "Did someone hurt you?" He exhaled what might have been laughter. "Yes," he said, "long ago." She nodded solemnly. "Mother has marks too, but hers are hidden inside." That observation cut deeper than expected. Marcus stood slowly, retreating to his chair. For a while, no one spoke. The children curled together and drifted into sleep. The woman sat beside them, her bowl empty, her arms wrapped around her own chest as if the warmth had failed to reach her core. When Marcus returned later with a clean blanket, he found her laying her own threadbare covering on the stone floor. She was preparing to sleep in the corner, away from the bed, away from him. "You don't need to do that," he said quietly. She didn't look up. Her voice barely reached above a whisper. "You refused my proposition. I didn't require it," he said. I saw the girl's feet. A silence stretched between them. Then came a response he hadn't anticipated. Others demanded more than frozen feet to open their doors. The words were sharp, sorrowful, not bitter, just matter of fact. Marcus didn't respond. He simply stared. At her, then at the children. Eventually he approached and extended his hand, not to touch her, but to offer assistance. "The bed provides warmth," he said. "That's not an invitation. It's survival." She looked at his outstretched hand, hesitating, then nodded once and rose to her feet. She lay beside him later, rigid and silent, facing away. She never touched him. Never dared. After several minutes, her voice broke through the darkness. "I expect nothing from you except gratitude for the heat, for the nourishment." Marcus stared at the ceiling. He hadn't expected company, hadn't desired it. Yet something about this strange woman and her two fragile children had cracked the ice. That had encased his heart for years. And now, in the cold silence of Kithara Prime, there were 3 additional heartbeats echoing against the storm. For the first time in years, he didn't mind the sound. Chapter 2. Dawn without light morning never truly arrived on Kithara Prime. It simply became a lighter shade of gray. The storm had buried the dwelling completely during the night. Snow pressed against the windows like frozen smoke, half transparent and cold enough to turn breath to mist within seconds. Outside, the landscape had been erased. No vegetation, no pathways, no sky, just the sound of wind still clawing at the walls. Still hungry Dot inside, however, the silence had transformed. Marcus sat at the table, spoon turning slowly through a pot of reheated stew. He didn't focus on the bowl. His attention kept drifting to the far end of the room where the woman slept, if sleep described her state. She lay curled on the distant side of his bed, back toward him, as motionless as the dead. Beside her, the 2 children were wrapped in his old blankets, breathing softly. They hadn't stirred since collapsing the previous night. Kale, the older one, kept a protective hand across his sister's back even in slumber. Nira slept more deeply, her tiny hand resting over her mouth as if to silence her dreams. Marcus hadn't. Slept his body had rested, half slumped in the chair with his coat still on, but his mind hadn't stopped. The woman's words from the night before echoed repeatedly. Others demanded more than frozen feet to open their doors. She hadn't spoken with bitterness. That made it worse. He didn't even know her name. Yet she had offered herself like a transaction. A trade warmth for worth. Marcus grunted under his breath and stood, moving to check the external vent pressure. He kept his movements quiet, instinctively from respect or perhaps caution. But when he passed the bed, the woman stirred, her eyes opening halfway amber and glassy. She didn't flinch this time, but neither did she speak. He nodded once. She blinked slowly, then shifted up into a sitting position without a word. Only then did he realize she hadn't slept. Not fully. Neither had he. They were both just pretending. "You should eat," he said, gesturing to the pot. "It's still warm." She hesitated, as if uncertain whether the offer was genuine. Then she stood, moved across the room, and sat opposite him. Not close, not distant, just careful. He handed her a bowl. She kept it in both hands and brought it to her lips slowly. She drank too quickly, coughed once, then slowed herself. Her eyes never lifting from the bowl. Her voice, when it came, was softer than the snow against the windows. "My name is Zinara." Marcus nodded once. "Marcus, I know." That caught his attention. He looked up, frowning. "How?" She lowered the bowl slightly. "The outpost files weren't encrypted. I read the logs before the evacuations. They mentioned 1 human remaining behind. Marcus Kane, ex-military. Reclusive. Caution advised." His brow lifted. "That was years ago." She nodded. "But you're still here." Marcus leaned back. "Did you come looking for me?" "No." She glanced over at the children, still sleeping. "I came looking for somewhere the storms wouldn't find us, somewhere no one would look." That answered one question. Maybe not all of it, but enough to make Marcus's stomach tighten. "You're running." She didn't deny it. Instead, she stared into her stew and whispered, "I'm hiding." Silence again. He could hear the wind pressing harder, shifting the snow outside. The heater groaned as it compensated. He stood, poured a cup of heated water, handed it to her. She took it with a nod, hands shaking just enough to betray her exhaustion. He sat again. "What happened?" he asked, not demandingly, just tired. She didn't look at him. "My bondmate died during the war. He was linked to me. That means more than marriage in our culture. A piece of me went with him. Afterward, I wasn't complete anymore. Not in their eyes." Marcus said nothing, just listened. "I tried to raise the children alone. I bartered, worked, but alone women were not protected. Not in some provinces, especially not with offspring." Her voice cracked slightly there, but she didn't stop. "They said I was an invitation, unclaimed. It didn't matter that I said no. It never mattered." Marcus's jaw clenched. She finished her stew, then placed the bowl down gently, as if breaking it would cost her something she couldn't afford. "That's why I said what I said last night. Not because I wanted to, because it had worked before." Her eyes lifted slowly to meet his. "I'm sorry." He shook his head. "Don't be." Zinara let out a breath she'd clearly been holding for hours. Behind them, a small voice pierced the quiet. "Is there more broth, Mr. Marcus?" Nira stood beside the bed, her silver hair sticking up wildly, tiny bare feet curled against the cold floor. Marcus immediately rose, grabbed a bowl, and filled it without question. He handed it to her, careful not to spill. She held it like a treasure, beaming. Zinara rushed to her, crouching down. "No, slow, Nira. It's hot." Nira nodded, blew on it dramatically, and looked up at Marcus. "Can I call you father?" Marcus froze. Nira added quickly, "If you say no, I'll wait until you say yes." Zinara looked horrified. "Nira," but Marcus didn't interrupt. He crouched beside her, meeting her eyes. "You can call me whatever makes you feel warm," he said quietly. Nira nodded, satisfied, and wandered over to sit near the thermal generator. Kale stirred now, blinking grudgingly. When he saw Marcus, he sat up straighter, immediately alert. "Is she bothering you?" he asked sharply. "She asks many questions." "She's fine," Marcus said, standing. "You hungry?" Kale hesitated, clearly trying to gauge whether this was a test. Then he nodded once. "I'll get you some." Zinara stared at Marcus for a moment longer. Then she said something that caught him off guard. "She didn't just mean you're scarred," she said. He glanced at her. "Nira," Zinara said, her voice low. "When she said you had marks inside, she meant it. She sees things others don't." That made him pause, but he didn't reply. Instead, he ladled out another bowl of stew, handed it to Kale, and sat back down. The cabin didn't feel quiet anymore. There was still silence, but it had changed. It wasn't empty. It was full, breathing. Marcus found himself watching Zinara as she guided Nira to sit gently, brushing snowflakes from her daughter's hair. Girl leaned into her touch like it was the only anchor she had in the world. They weren't just refugees. They were survivors. And somehow, they'd ended up here in his silence. He didn't know what that meant yet. But for the first time in years, he didn't want to be alone anymore. Not entirely. The storm outside could keep raging. Inside, the cabin had changed. It had begun to warm. Chapter 3. Scars and stories. The cold outside had grown quieter, but it hadn't relented. It had merely sunk deeper, settled like dust inside every crevice of the abandoned moon. Snow no longer slammed against the walls with fury. It pressed now with silence and weight, suffocating in its stillness. Inside the cabin, however, there was warmth, not just from the heater that hummed beside the far wall, but from something subtler, something slower. It wasn't comfort yet, but it was close. Marcus had woken before dawn, if one could call anything on Kithara prime dawn. There was no sunrise here, just the pale light that occasionally filtered through the snowpack. Sky, suggesting that the next cycle had begun. He made coffee from a nearly depleted tin and stood at the viewport, watching nothing. There was still no horizon, no sky, only white. Behind him, the sound of small feet padding softly across the floor caught his attention. Nira, wrapped in an old thermal blanket like a tiny ghost, emerged from the sleeping area and stood quietly. "Beside the heater? Cold?" he asked without turning. She shook her head, then yawned. "I wanted to say good morning to the warm thing first." Marcus's brow lifted. "The heater?" She nodded, crouching beside it and touching the metal panel with her fingertips. "It keeps us safe. So I say thank you." He didn't know what to say to that. He'd fought wars over resource infrastructure and watched entire cities burn because of failed heating cores. And here this little girl was whispering gratitude to an old machine like it was a guardian spirit. Zenara emerged a few minutes later, her movements quiet and fluid. She didn't speak at first, but she offered Marcus a brief nod before tending to her children. She had that distant look again, the one he'd come to recognize as her default state, alert, reserved, quietly preparing herself to be told to leave. She always acted like this might be the last day they were allowed to stay. He poured 2 mugs of hot water and handed one to her without comment. She accepted it with a whisper of thanks, then sat beside the heater with Nira and folded her legs beneath her, brushing the child's silver hair away from her face. Kale rose more slowly. He stretched stiffly, hiding a wince as he moved his feet. Still sore. "I didn't cry," Kale said, trying to straighten his posture as Marcus knelt to check the wrappings on the boy's frostbitten toes. "Even when Mother put the salve on. That doesn't mean it didn't hurt," Marcus replied, carefully unwinding the cloth. The skin was pinker today, less gray. That was a good sign. Kale gave a tight nod but said nothing else. He didn't talk much, and when he did, it was with the cautious precision of someone who'd learned that the wrong words could have consequences. Marcus recognized that type. He'd seen boys grow up too fast on refugee transport ships, their childhoods crushed beneath the pressure of survival. "You're healing," Marcus said, rewrapping the foot. "Good sign." Kale hesitated, then asked, "Will we stay here until we're all better?" The question wasn't innocent. It was calculated. Kale was probing, trying to guess how long safety might last. This time Marcus stood. "You'll stay as long as you need to." Zenara looked up, startled, as if the words were an unexpected kindness. The boy nodded once. "Thank you." Marcus turned to stoke the fire, hiding the way that simple thank you settled into his chest like an unfamiliar weight. He'd spent years pushing people away. Letting someone in especially like this felt like exposing a wound that had never truly closed. While he worked, he heard soft scratching sounds coming from the heater's side panel. At first, he thought something inside was malfunctioning. He moved quickly, but paused when he saw what it was. Nira, crouched low with a piece of black charcoal from the fire bin, was drawing on the metal. Slowly, carefully, 3 stick figures, one tall and broad-shouldered, 2 smaller ones on either side. The middle one had a long black line down its cheek. "Nira," Zenara said sharply, seeing what her daughter was doing. "No, don't draw on. She's fine," Marcus interrupted. "Let her." Nira looked up at him, wide-eyed. "I made us." He crouched beside her. "Tell me about it." "This one's you," she said, tapping the tall figure. "I put your face line the scar." She nodded solemnly. "So we know it's you. And the other 2, Kale and me. Why are we all holding hands?" "Because you're in the middle now, like a bridge. That means you hold both of us." He looked at the drawing for a long moment, then stood. He returned a few seconds later with a square of old ration cloth, clean and unused. "Here," he said, handing it to her. "Next time you want to draw, use this." "But that one stays," Mira beamed. Zenara didn't smile, not quite, but her shoulders eased slightly. Later, while the children napped, Kale sprawled on the cot with one arm flung over his eyes. Nira, curled against his side like a kitten, Zenara helped Marcus reorganize the ration shelf. She worked in silence for a while, passing him items to log or discard. Then, without looking up, she said, "You didn't have to be kind to them." He glanced at her. "I mean," she continued, voice quiet but steady, "you didn't owe us anything." "You could have closed the door," he shrugged. "They were freezing." "It wasn't a hard decision." "It is for some." He didn't reply. She didn't stop. "Kindness here feels dangerous. I'm still adjusting to the idea that you're not waiting to take something back." Marcus set down the tin in his hand. "I'm not," he said firmly. Zenara nodded, but her hands trembled slightly as she continued working. That tremble wasn't fear. Not anymore. It was tension. A wire pulled too tight for too long. He thought of something she'd said before. "I offered because it worked before." The idea that warmth could be mistaken for barter still made him feel sick. "I'm not going to ask for anything." "Zenara," he said quietly, "not now, not ever." She finally met his eyes. And for the first time, there wasn't fear or distance in them. There was silence, but it was a silence made of understanding. That night, they all sat by the heater. The storm outside had softened. Kale carved a small figure from a broken chair leg Marcus had given him to practice with. Nira hummed while rolling up a bundle of cloth to make a doll. Zenara prepared a stew thin, but hot. And Marcus simply watched, not from the edges, not as a stranger. As part of it. When it was time to sleep, Zenara didn't go to the floor. She waited. Marcus didn't say anything. He simply turned down one half of the bed, then stepped aside. She lay beside him. This time she didn't face the wall. She faced him. Her hands trembled less. The heater clicked softly, and the cabin creaked as the storm receded. "You're different from what I expected," she whispered. "So are you." They said nothing more. And in the quiet that followed, the warmth no longer came. Just from the fire. Chapter 4. The weight of memory. The day began like all the others since Zenora and her children had arrived. Gray light filtered through frost-laced windows, and the soft mechanical breath of the heating system struggled to hold its ground against the cold outside. But the stillness inside the cabin carried something new. A subtle heaviness, a quiet crack forming in the rhythm they had built. Kale was already awake when Marcus stepped into the main room. He sat at the edge of the sleeping mat, one leg tucked beneath him, the other extended, staring down at the wrappings around his foot like they'd betrayed him in the night. Marcus crouched beside him, grabbing the medkit without a word. He'd done this every morning: unwrap, check the circulation, reapply the salve. But this morning, Kale didn't lift his eyes. "Marcus," the boy said, voice flat, "can I go help you today?" Marcus glanced at him, then back at the foot he was carefully tending. "You shouldn't be walking too much yet. Skin's still healing." "I can still help." "Not on that foot. I can't." Kale's jaw tightened. "I'm not weak." Marcus didn't respond. He gently unwound the last of the bandages. The boy didn't flinch, but the toes were still tinged purple at the edges. Better than before, but not fully recovered. "You were out there too long," Marcus muttered. Kale stared straight ahead, fists clenched. "I didn't let her walk on the ice." "And now you're the one hurting," Marcus said, his voice softening. "That's what being a protector does. But even protectors need to rest." Kale's lips trembled, but he didn't cry. He just nodded stiffly, face burning with frustration. You don't have to prove anything to me, Marcus added. I already know you're strong, Cale swallowed and blinked hard. But what if I stop being useful? Marcus paused, caught off guard by the question. He looked up at the boy, really looked at him. You're not here because you're useful, he said quietly. You're here because this place is better with you in it. That's enough. Cale said nothing after that, but his shoulders relaxed a little as Marcus began rewrapping his foot careful, steady. Later that day, while Zenara prepared a thin stew from the last of the dried rootstock, Marcus stepped outside to check that the solar array. The wind had died, but the snow was piled nearly 2 meters deep. He cleared off the outer vents, hammering through frost while the thoughts in his mind drifted further from the task at hand. He wasn't used to this routine company. The quiet weight of another person's presence lingering in the corners of the PN room. It wasn't discomfort anymore. It was unspoken obligation, not out of duty, but care. The kind that scared him more than bullets ever had. When he came back in, Zenara was crouched by the fire. Nira played beside her with a makeshift doll, just a rolled rag with buttons for eyes. Cale lay on the cot, carving a piece of wood with deep, careful strokes. Marcus leaned his back against the wall and watched them. Watched her. She looked more relaxed now, though her eyes still flicked toward him with that familiar reserve. You want to know? She said suddenly, without looking up. Marcus raised an eyebrow. About what? Why we ran. Her voice was calm, but her fingers trembled as they stirred the pot. Why I said what I said at your door. I figured you'd tell me when you were ready. She looked up then, amber eyes steady. I'm not sure there is a ready, but you've earned the truth. Marcus didn't move, didn't interrupt. She sat back and rapped, her arms around her knees. My people, the Zephyri, we value bonding. Deep pairing, it's sacred. When my bondmate died in the war, they said I was broken. Not just mourning, incomplete, unwhole. Her lips curled slightly, bitter. That word was whispered like a curse. Nira, sensing the tension, crawled into her mother's lap. Zenara's arms instinctively wrapped around her. Where we lived, a woman without a mate is considered unstable. A danger to balance, especially if she has children. They called my son and daughter half-bloods, not because of their father, but because of me, because I was no longer whole. Marcus clenched his jaw. There were offers, she continued. Marriages of convenience, but they didn't want a family. They wanted obedience, a body, not a bond. Her voice was like ice now. The first man who tried didn't ask. The second thought I owed him. The third said my children would be better off if they forgot I ever existed. She looked up then, not ashamed, but tired. So we ran. A long silence stretched between them. I came here because the file said a man lived out here, a lone human, ex-military. I thought maybe you'd understand what it means to live where no one else wants to. Marcus took a slow breath. I do. Her eyes softened, but her voice stayed firm. I didn't come to beg. I came to survive. And when I said what I said that night, it was because the only way I've been let through a door lately was by offering myself. Marcus looked down. I didn't mean to insult you. You didn't, he said quietly. You reminded me that this world is still cruel and still worth resisting. She gave a small nod, and for a moment the silence between them felt like understanding. Instead of avoidance, Marcus stepped closer to the fire and crouched beside it. Want to hear something shameful? She tilted her head. I didn't stay here because I loved solitude. I stayed because the last time I tried to return, I didn't belong there anymore. The war stripped something from me. I used to command squads, keep people alive, make the calls no one wanted to make. I buried too many. Left a daughter behind when I deployed. Never made it back in time to say goodbye. Zenara's eyes softened. When the noise stopped, When the orders stopped, I didn't know what to do with myself anymore, so I ran too, just slower." He gave a half-smile, bitter and small. "I never thought anyone would come to find me here." "Well," she said, "I didn't come looking for a soldier. And yet here I am." That night, after the stew had been eaten and the lights had dimmed to soft amber, Zenora didn't hesitate when Marcus lifted the blanket. She lay down beside him with quiet familiarity now, as if her body had begun to trust where her mind still hesitated. Nira slept nearby, her tiny hand curled around a corner of Marcus's coat. Cale lay silently in the shadows, his carving knife resting beside a small, unfinished figure before drifting off. Marcus murmured, "You know you don't have to explain anything else." "I know," she whispered, "but I wanted you to." They lay in silence, for a while listening to the faint hum of the heater and the wind pressing against the walls. Outside, Kithara remained a frozen wasteland. But inside that cabin, in the warmth of shared stories and hard-earned trust, something fragile was growing. And for the first time in years, Marcus Kane felt like he wasn't just surviving. He was healing. Chapter 5. The sound of fear. The fall was nothing dramatic. Not the kind that would leave broken bones or blood. It was small, quick, ordinary even, but it hit harder than Marcus had expected. Nira had been running again, wild with energy after days of quiet play. Her laughter had been echoing off the metal walls of the cabin like a song, chasing the cold. Out of the corners, Cale had just finished carving a tiny wooden bird, which he proudly showed her before she decided to test its flying ability. Marcus was only a few feet away, crouched near the heater checking the intake filter. He meant to warn her, "Not so fast," or "Watch the corners," but the words never made it out. Her foot clipped the edge of a low bench. She pitched forward with a squeal, flailed, and landed hard on her arm. The thud was sharp, her cry sharper. He was moving before her scream ended. "Nira!" Zenara gasped, instantly at her daughter's side. Marcus got there first. He knelt beside her, his hands already moving to assess the injury. "Let me see," he said gently. She was biting her lip, her amber eyes glassy with pain. Her right arm was curled protectively against her chest. "It hurts," she whispered. "Really bad." Zenara hovered just above, trembling, trying not to interfere. Marcus examined the arm with care. No swelling at the elbow, but the forearm was red and already starting to bruise. He tested her wrist with feather-like pressure. She winced, but nothing screamed broken. "Not fractured," he said. "Bruised and tender, but should keep full movement." Nira sniffled. "Will it fall off?" "Not unless you keep testing your bird's flying lessons on the furniture," he replied. That got a watery laugh out of her. "I'll make a splint," he said. "Keep it still for a few days." Zenara nodded wordlessly and helped ease Nira out of her coat. Marcus moved to the supply shelf, pulled out an old ration box, and broke off 2 smooth strips of plastic. He wrapped them gently around the girl's arm with linen strips, improvising with the steady hands of someone who had done this before on the field. In the dark, with less. Nira barely flinched. "I was brave," she mumbled as the last knot was tied. "You were more than brave," Zenara whispered, kissing her temple. "You are my strongest star." But Marcus wasn't smiling. He sat back slowly, staring at the girl's small, trembling form. Her silver hair sticking to her cheek, her breath still shaky. Something in his chest tightened. It was that sound, her scream. It was too much like the one he hadn't heard in time. He rose without a word and walked to the far end of the cabin. His hands found the wall, pressing against the cold metal. He stayed there, silent, shoulders stiff. Zenara watched him. She didn't speak for a moment, but when she did, her voice was soft, low, a whisper meant for him alone. "You're not panicking because she's hurt," she said. Marcus didn't move. You're panicking because you've heard that cry before." Still he said nothing, but his jaw flexed just once. Zinara approached slowly barefoot, quiet. She didn't touch him, just stood close enough that he could feel her presence like heat. "My daughter," he said at last. The words sounded strange in his mouth, like metal scraped against stone. Her name was Elena. She was 7. He closed his eyes, breathed in through his nose. "I left for my last deployment thinking I'd be gone. 3 weeks. They said it was routine, nothing complicated. I promised her I'd be back before her birthday." He swallowed hard. "She asked me to bring her a stone from the Crimson Moons. Said she wanted to paint it and keep it under her pillow. For dreams. I told her I'd bring 5. Zinara said nothing. She stood in stillness, listening. She got sick," Marcus went on. "A fast-moving fever, something rare. It came out of nowhere. One day she had a cough. 2 days later she couldn't breathe." He stared down at his hands as if they still held something they could never let go. "My wife, her mother called my unit, begged them to reach me. But I was underground, communications blackout. It took them too long to find me, and by the time they did..." He shook his head. "I missed her by 4 hours. 4 damn hours." His voice cracked just once. "When I finally got home, the house was empty. My wife had gone. No note, no forwarding address, just nothing." Zinara finally moved. She reached out and rested her hand gently against his forearm. Not to pull, not to comfort, just to say, "I'm here. I came here because I thought if I disappeared far enough, maybe I could outrun the sound of it." She didn't respond with pity. Didn't say she was sorry. She didn't have to. Instead, she stepped in front of him, slowly, carefully. And then, she said, "I carried my bondmate's body back myself." Her voice was steady, matter-of-fact. "They told me I should have left him. That a woman with children had no business retrieving a dead soldier, but I couldn't leave him alone on that field." She looked up at Marcus with eyes like molten gold. "When I got back, they called me unfit, dangerous, unclean. I didn't follow the rules of grief. I didn't let go when they told me to." Marcus met her gaze. "And now?" he asked. "Now," she said, "I'm still grieving. But I'm not alone anymore." She reached up, touched his face softly, reverently. Her fingers brushed the edge of his scar as if trying to map the pain etched into him. "You didn't fail her, Marcus." "Yes, I did." "No," she said firmly. "You loved her. That's not failure. That's proof." His breath caught. "She would have been proud of the man you became," Zinara whispered. "The one who opens his door to freezing strangers. Who holds a broken child and says she'll be okay. Who gives his only thermal socks to a girl who drew a laugh out of him. A real one." It cracked something open and released the weight pressing on his ribs. They stood like that for a long moment, the two of them bathed in silence, but not the hollow kind. The full kind. The healing kind out behind them, the soft sounds of sleep, filled the cabin. Nira murmuring something in a dream, Kale's even breathing from the cot. Marcus finally said, "I don't know how to stop carrying it." "You don't," Zinara said, "but you can share it. And when you do, it's lighter." He leaned forward slightly, forehead resting against hers. She didn't pull back. "You're different from what I expected," he whispered. "So are you." That night, for the first time in years, Marcus fell asleep not from exhaustion or duty, but from peace. The weight hadn't left, but it no longer sat on him alone. He had handed part of it over, and in return, he'd been given warmth. Real warmth. The kind that doesn't come from fire. The kind that starts in another person's arms and stays, long after the flames go out. Chapter 6. The quiet morning, the morning unfolded like a gentle sigh. No storm clawing at the roof, no emergency repairs waiting. Just a stillness that didn't Feel empty but settled like a blanket finally laid flat after 2. Many days wrinkled with tension. It was the kind of quiet Marcus had once feared. The kind that used to feel too fragile to trust. But now, as he stood near the stove stirring a pot of porridge while Nira snored softly from the bedding behind him, it felt earned. The cabin had warmed early that morning, not just from the heater, but from the soft radiance of shared peace. A peace not demanded or declared, but one that simply was. Cale was already awake, sitting by the table with a small chunk of wood in one hand, carving tool in the other. The figure he was working on had arms now clumsy, uneven ones, but it was unmistakably a person. Marcus noticed the details. The way the boy had etched a tiny line across the left cheek. The scar. He didn't comment, but a smile tugged at one corner of his mouth. Nira stirred next, groaning dramatically and pulling the blanket over her face. "Is it food time already?" She mumbled. "Smells like it," Cale said, still focused on the wood. Nira peeked out from beneath the blanket and sniffed the air. "It's porridge." Marcus lifted a spoon from the pot and examined it like he wasn't sure if he should feel insulted. "And what's wrong with porridge?" "Nothing," she said, rolling to her feet with one arm still splinted, the other dragging her doll by the leg. "Just that I smelled better on the outpost shuttle once, and that was full of feet." Zinara let out a short, surprised laugh from the far end of the room. She was folding clean linen, moving with unhurried grace, her long silver hair pulled back in a loose braid. Marcus shook his head and poured the porridge into 4 bowls. "You eat it, or you smell like feet next. Your call." Nira grinned and climbed onto the bench beside Cale, who was now putting finishing touches on his carving. "Is that me?" she asked, tilting her head. Cale nodded. "You, with your arm bandaged. And your big head." "My head's not big." "It's a little big." "You're growing into it. You're not supposed to grow sideways." Zinara stepped between them, placing a gentle hand on each of their heads. "Eat, or I'll make you smell like feet." They quieted quickly, lips twitching in half-suppressed smiles. Marcus set the last bowl down in front of Zinara and took his own, sitting across from her at the table. He didn't say much at first, he never did during meals, but his eyes lingered on the peaceful disorder of it all. A half-finished carving, a doll with one eye missing, steam rising from chipped bowls. Not perfect, but real. After breakfast, Zinara cleaned the dishes while humming a soft tune in her native language. Nira hummed along off-key but enthusiastic, while Cale returned to his carving, now attempting legs. Marcus took the opportunity to reorganize one of the shelves near the back wall, where emergency tools had been piling up in lopsided clusters. As he sorted through a tangle of old cords and half-burnt solar panels, Zinara's voice floated over from behind him. "Thank you." He glanced over his shoulder. "For what?" "For today." "It's just a quiet morning." "That's what I mean," she said, rapping the last dry cloth around a clean mug. "You gave us a day that asked for nothing. No danger, no running, no proving we deserve to stay." Marcus paused, then turned fully to face her. "You don't have to prove anything anymore. Not here." Her eyes held his for a long moment. "I believe you now." Nira interrupted before either of them could say more, holding up her doll with pride. "Look, I made her a dress from your old sock." Zinara blinked. "Which sock?" "The blue one with a hole." "That was your only thermal pair." "Zinara," Marcus said, half amused, half horrified. "It was the left one," Marcus replied dryly. "The hole made it an underperformer. She said it was too itchy for your feet but perfect for her dolly's soul." Nira added solemnly. Zinara laughed again, the sound fuller this time, carrying into the corners of the cabin. Marcus didn't laugh often, but when he did, it was quiet and real, like something exhaled after holding your breath for too long. As the day unfolded, no one asked for more than what was already there. Marcus repaired a loose drawer. Cale finished the legs on his carving and shyly asked Marcus if he wanted to keep it. Nira spent nearly an hour painting rocks outside the airlock with melted wax crayons. Zinara combed through the cabinet and sorted supplies with the steady focus of someone who finally trusted tomorrow would come later. After lunch, Zinara joined Marcus by the window, both of them sitting in silence, shoulders almost brushing. The snow beyond the glass shimmered with soft light, no footsteps, no alarms. Just endless, untouched white. Do you miss it? She asked suddenly. He looked at her, puzzled. What? The war. The movement, the feeling of always doing something. He shook his head. No, I miss the people, not the chaos. She nodded slowly. I used to miss being needed. Now I just want to be chosen. Marcus turned his head toward her. You are. Their eyes met again, and something passed between them. Nothing loud, nothing dramatic. Just recognition, quiet and clean. That evening, as the sun's weak rays faded behind layers of frozen mist, the four of them gathered near the heater again. Nira fell asleep first, curled up against Zinara's side with her doll tucked beneath her arm. Cale leaned on Marcus's leg as he read from an old mission manual repurposed as a bedtime story, more technical than entertaining. But Cale listened. Like it was poetry. When the children were both asleep, Marcus moved to bank the heater and dim the lights. Zinara remained seated on the floor, arms wrapped around her knees. You didn't ask me anything today, she said quietly. Didn't need to, Marcus replied. Some days are better quiet. She nodded, thoughtful. It was a good day. It was. And it was not because anything happened, but because nothing did. No past chased them. No future loomed. Only warmth, breath, quiet, and the subtle, extraordinary miracle of peace. A day that asked for nothing and gave everything. Chapter 7. New light. The snow had stopped sometime during the night. By morning, light filtered through the windows in a way it never had before, soft, golden, and wholly unexpected. It touched the walls like an old friend knocking gently at the door. For the first time in what felt like forever, Marcus could see past the frost-covered glass. The landscape outside had shifted from a pale void to something defined. White hills. Shadows stretched long by morning light, and the faintest blush of blue in the sky. Inside, the air was still cool but no longer biting. The heater hummed, but it wasn't struggling. The cabin was quiet, and yet not the fragile quiet of tension. It was the kind that came after deep sleep and peace. Marcus was already awake. He'd been up before the others, standing at the window, sipping a weak brew and listening to the world breathe. Behind him, blankets rustled. Nira stirred first, murmuring in her sleep and flipping her doll to the opposite side of her pillow. Cale remained wrapped like a cocoon, his chest rising and falling evenly, and then Zinara moved. Marcus didn't turn. He could hear her bare feet crossing the floor, soft as falling snow. Her reflection flickered faintly in the glass beside his. She stood close but not touching. The sky is blue, she said quietly, her voice still heavy with sleep. He nodded. Hadn't seen it in a while. It feels strange. It does. They stood like that for a moment longer, letting the warmth of shared silence settle between them. Marcus set his cup down and finally looked at her. Her hair was a little tousled, lips still marked by sleep. She wore one of his old shirts now, too. Long on her, sleeves rolled. Somehow it suited her more than anything else she'd worn. He studied her face without hiding it this time. The faint lines of exhaustion beneath her eyes were softer now, no longer etched deep. She looked different in the light, not just less guarded, but alive in a way he hadn't let himself hope for. Sleep well? He asked. She gave a slow nod. I think I did. Nira's sleepy voice cut through the stillness behind them. Is it a soup day or a biscuit day? Marcus smiled. Biscuits, If someone didn't finish them all yesterday, I only had 3. You had 4, Cale mumbled without opening his eyes. I shared one with my dolly, so technically 3.5. Zinara stepped away from the window, brushing Nira's hair gently. Wash first, then biscuits. No arguments. As they moved into their morning routine, Marcus remained by the window, a little longer watching them. It still amazed him how quickly they'd made the cabin feel like something more than shelter. It felt like a home. He'd spent years building its walls, but they had filled the space between them. After breakfast, Cale and Nira played a quiet game near the heater while Zinara washed the dishes in the small sink, humming softly. Marcus dried them beside her, their arms brushing occasionally in the narrow space. It was one of those casual moments, mundane. Even but in the corner of her mouth he saw something that hadn't been there before, a small, private smile. When she turned toward him to pass the last bowl, their hands touched. Nothing dramatic, just fingers brushing over ceramic. But the warmth there lingered. She didn't pull away. Neither did he. Her gaze met his, held it, and this time she didn't look away. I used to dream about a place like this, she said quietly. He let that settle. And now? Now I don't have to dream. He dried his hands slowly. Zinara. She stepped a little closer. Yes? I don't want you to feel like you owe me anything. I don't. I'm not good with words. You don't have to be. His breath caught slightly when she lifted her hand, fingers brushing the side of his face. Her thumb rested gently against the edge of his scar, tracing the rough line like it was something worth memorizing. You were the first place we landed. That didn't hurt, she whispered, and before he could say anything more, she leaned forward and kissed him. It was a quiet thing. Not rushed, not hungry, just steady. Sure. Her lips were soft and cool at first, but the warmth between them grew quickly. His hand found the side of her waist, steadying her, grounding both of them. The kiss deepened slightly, not in intensity, but in meaning. It wasn't about passion. It was about arrival. When she pulled back, her eyes stayed closed for just a breath longer than his. And when they opened, she looked lighter, like something heavy had finally slipped from her shoulders. You're not what I expected, she said. Smiled faintly. You either. From behind them, a small voice piped up. Are you kissing? Nira stood by the heater, holding her doll upside down. Her expression was half curious, half scandalized. Zinara blinked, then chuckled. Yes, sweet one, we were. Does that mean you're married now? No, Zinara said. It means we care about each other. Oh. Nira nodded wisely. That's even better. Cale didn't look up from his carving. You owe me 2 biscuits if they kiss again. Before supper. Deal, Nira whispered to her doll. Marcus really laughed for the first time in years. It surprised even him how natural it felt, like air rushing into lungs he'd forgotten how to use. Zinara stepped beside him and rested her head against his shoulder, her hand finding his and curling her fingers around his palm. They stood there for a while as the sunlight crept across the floor, stretching warm fingers over the blankets, the half-finished drawings, the carved figures and crooked tools and chipped bowls. Everything imperfect. Everything real. Later, as the sun dipped. Lo, Zinara looked out the window and murmured, When spring comes, maybe we plant something. Marcus glanced at her. You think the soil's good enough? I think we are. That night, after the children fell asleep, they shared the bed not out of necessity, but choice. No fear, no flinching, just warmth. And when the lights dimmed and the cabin fell silent again, Marcus reached out and gently pulled her close. Not because he had to, but because he wanted her there. Not for survival, but for life. Because home wasn't where you hid from the cold. It was where you let someone kiss you until you forgot what loneliness ever felt like. And Marcus Kane, soldier, exile, man made of silence, was finally warm. Epilogue. Seeds of spring months had passed since the storm. Kithara Prime had begun to thaw slowly, like an old wound learning how to close. Where once there was only white and wind and cold that clawed its way into bones, now there were hints of green. Small at first shy moss at the edge of the path, a few patches of grass curling up through melting ice. Life, where for years there had only been silence, and behind the cabin, in the uneven stretch of land Marcus had once called the scrap field, a garden had grown. It hadn't started with much, just a few seed packets Zinara had found sealed in a storage crate, half expired and written in a language she couldn't fully read. Kale had cleared the stones. Marcus had built low fencing from broken panels. Nira had named every seedling. Now, under the hesitant warmth of Kithara's pale sun, the plants had bloomed. Short-stemmed green roots, clustered berry weeds, and fat, twisting stalks of crimson fruit leaned under their own weight, ready for harvest, and the four of them were their hands in the soil, laughter echoing through air that had forgotten what it meant to carry joy. Marcus knelt at the edge of the plot, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. He wore his sleeves rolled high, his boots muddy, and he couldn't remember the last time he'd smiled this easily. "Pull from the base," he said gently, guiding Nira's hands. "Not the top. You'll snap the stem." She nodded, tongue poking out in concentration as she gripped a stubborn crimson fruit. "Like this? Twist first, then pull. Like when I open your toolbox." "Exactly," he chuckled. "Only this doesn't explode if you do it wrong." "Good," she said, yanking the fruit free with a triumphant sound. "Because I didn't like when the blue one fizzed." "That was a plasma cell, not a fruit," Zinara called from across the garden. Her arms full of harvested greens. "And you were told not to touch it." "She was helping," Kale defended his sister, holding up a cluster of bright leaf greens. "We were exploring." "You nearly disabled the entire power grid," Marcus added. "But we fixed it," Kale said with a shrug. Zinora met Marcus's gaze across the garden. Her expression was full of warmth and mischief, the kind he now knew was her version of laughter. Her long silver hair was tied up in a loose braid, strands coming undone in the breeze. She looked like someone who had belonged here forever, and maybe, Marcus thought, she always had. By midday, the harvest was nearly done. Sacks of vegetables lay stacked near the shed, and the sun week as it was bathed the clearing in golden light. They sat together on the cabin steps to rest, the children between them, each holding a piece of fresh-cut fruit. Nira leaned into Marcus's side, barefoot and content, legs streaked with dirt. Kale sat on the other side, his carving knife tucked into his belt like a badge of honor. The moment was so peaceful, so quietly perfect, that it almost passed without notice. Almost. Nira leaned her head against Marcus's shoulder, looked up at him, and said it like she had said 100 small things before, like it wasn't anything new. "Papa," Marcus froze. Zinara's head turned slightly, her lips parting, but she didn't interrupt. Kale shifted, folding his arms across his chest like he'd been waiting. "Yeah," he said. "Careful." Nira held up a berry-stained hand. "I think this one's for you." He took the berry from her and tried to swallow the emotion that rose in his throat. She leaned into him again and whispered, "You're my papa now, right?" He looked at Zinara. She was watching him, eyes shining. No hesitation in them now. Just quiet hope. Marcus nodded slowly. "If you want me to be." Nira gave a firm nod, satisfied. "You already are." Kale's voice followed, less playful, more serious, but no less sincere. "I've been calling you that in my head for a while," he said. "Just didn't know if I was allowed to." Marcus turned to him. "You don't need permission for that." Kale nodded. Then it settled, and just like that it was. Not with ceremony, not with grand declarations, but with dirt under their nails, sun on their backs, and the weight of the past finally light enough to breathe beneath. Later, when the children had gone inside to wash up and argue over who got the last piece of dried fruit, Marcus remained on the steps beside Zinara. They sat in silence for a while, watching clouds drift lazily over the thawing sky. Then Zinara leaned her head on his shoulder. "Did you ever imagine it like this?" she asked. He thought about it, then shook his head. "I didn't imagine it at all. I never let myself," she smiled. "And now? Now I don't have to imagine anymore. Now I just get to live it." He turned his head slightly, brushed a kiss against her temple. She closed her eyes, let herself rest against him. For the first time in years, there were no weapons within reach, no alarm set, no threats looming in the snow. There was only warmth, earth beneath their feet, two children giggling inside, a woman who had survived hell now smiling at the sound of her daughter calling someone Papa, and a man who had once been a soldier, once been nothing more than a shadow. In the frost, now rooted in something he never thought he'd find again. Family. It hadn't come with war or victory. It had grown in silence and bloomed in spring.